All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into the world of conflict resolution.
Okay.
We'll be looking specifically at a program that was run in Argentina called Coprec,
Okay.
and we're going to be drawing from an editorial by Jorge Amado Yunus.
Mm-hmm.
He's a lawyer and mediator who was deeply involved with Coprec.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and sadly the program has ended, but
Oh.
Yunes leaves us with a very positive outlook in his editorial.
Really?
He reminds us that each one chooses how they want to end their story.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's what he's doing. He's focusing on all the good that came out of Coprec.
Mm-hmm.
So to give you a little background,
Yeah.
Coprec was this space for consumers and businesses to come together to resolve disputes.
Ah, okay.
And they did this with the help of a trained mediator.
So instead of battling it out in court,
Exactly. It's about finding common ground through dialogue.
makes sense.
And Yunes shares some really incredible success stories in his writing.
Oh, I'd love to hear some.
Well, there's one about a woman named Paola whose son's dream trip was canceled because of the pandemic.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a tough situation, but thanks to Coprec, Paola was able to get the trip rebooked.
Wow, that's a real tangible benefit of mediation, right?
It is. It's about finding practical solutions to everyday problems.
Mm-hmm.
Another great example is Francisco. He was dealing with a debt that wasn't even his. It was wrongly attributed to him.
Oh, that's awful.
And it really messed up his credit history.
Ugh, I can only imagine.
But through Coprec, he was able to clear his name and get his credit back on track.
That must have been such a relief.
It was. These stories just show how Coprec helped people feel heard and empowered.
Yeah, it makes you think, what happens when those avenues for dialogue aren't there?
Right. Do those conflicts just fester and potentially escalate?
Exactly.
Well, that's actually a key point that Yunes emphasizes. He says that unresolved conflicts can breed anger and frustration.
Which can lead to bigger problems down the line.
Exactly. And he sees Coprec as providing that crucial space for communication and finding common ground.
It's like giving people the tools and the space to work things out.
It is. And you know what else I found really interesting?
What's that?
Yunes mentions this WhatsApp group called Coprec Creativo.
Oh, what was that about?
Well, it was this group where mediators could connect with each other, share experiences, and learn from one another.
Cool. So even professionals trained in conflict resolution need that sense of community and support.
They do. It highlights how we all benefit from connecting with others and gaining different perspectives.
Well, sure.
Okay, so speaking of gaining perspective, there's this one story that really stayed with me.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It involved a mediation session over a broken glass table.
Oh, a broken glass table. This sounds intriguing.
It is. So picture this. This couple arrives at the mediation with meticulous documentation.
Wow, meticulous.
Yeah, they basically turned the mediator's desk into a crime scene.
I can just imagine all the evidence laid out.
Right. And you could sense the wife's eagerness to share their side of the story while the husband was more, succinct in his explanation.
Oh, so different communication styles, but equally invested in the outcome.
Exactly. And it would have been so easy for this to turn into a blame game.
Right. Who broke the table? Whose fault was it?
Yeah, but the mediator did something really brilliant.
What did they do?
Instead of dwelling on the past and figuring out who was at fault, they shifted the focus to finding a solution that worked for everyone.
So reframing the situation, focusing on the future.
Precisely. And in the end, they reached an agreement that left both the couple and the furniture company feeling satisfied.
That's a great example of how skilled mediators can really transform a potentially volatile situation.
It is. And it really highlights the importance of focusing on solutions rather than blame.
Absolutely.
Coprec also served as a training ground for young lawyers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Yunes talks about how the program shaped their professional development in a way that traditional legal education sometimes misses.
So they got real-world experience in conflict resolution.
Exactly. And it's funny, Yunes even mentions someone calling a company's call center for help and being told, do a Coprec.
Wow, so it became like a go-to solution for resolving issues.
It did. It really speaks to Coprec's reputation and effectiveness.
That's impressive.
And beyond the practical skills, Yunes really emphasizes the deeper lessons learned, especially around empathy and conflict management.
That's so important.
He shares a story about this tech manager who was feeling burnt out from listening to people's complaints all day.
I can relate to that.
Right. And Yunes reminded him that his role wasn't just about resolving disputes, but about helping people recover what they'd lost. Whether it was a broken refrigerator, a faulty cell phone, or even a sense of fairness.
So it's not just about the material things, it's about restoring a sense of balance and justice.
Precisely. And that brings us to another challenge that Coprec had to face: the pandemic.
Oh yeah, imagine a program built on face-to-face interaction suddenly having to go virtual.
It was a huge adjustment, but they did it.
How'd they map?
While they quickly transitioned to online mediation, using platforms like Zoom and implemented electronic signatures,
So they embraced technology.
they did. And they even had to adapt their approach to empathy, recognizing that digital communication can be tricky.
That's when digital empathy comes in, right?
And you got it.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the nuances of virtual communication and building rapport through a screen.
Right, because you don't have those visual cues that you do in person.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, Yoons shares a really compelling story about a heated Zoom session between two lawyers.
Oh, this sounds intense.
It was. As the argument intensified, he could actually feel his own heart rate rising.
Whoa, I can feel the tension building just hearing about it.
Right. So he starts using a conscious breathing technique to try to calm himself down.
Makes sense trying to stay grounded in that moment.
Yeah. But then he does something even more remarkable.
What's that?
He actually shares his personal experience with the arguing parties. He reveals his own moment of vulnerability.
Wow, that's brave and unexpected.
And you know what? It completely shifted the energy in the room.
Really? How so?
The lawyers were taken aback by his honesty, and they kind of forgot about their dispute. Their anxieties came to the forefront, and they found common ground in their shared humanity.
That's amazing how vulnerability can create such a powerful shift.
It's a beautiful example of how acknowledging our emotions can de-escalate conflict and foster connection.
It's a reminder that we're all human, even in the midst of disagreements.
Exactly.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Coprec. Despite the fact that it closed down recently, there's still a lot we can learn from it.
Yeah, and I think what really stood out to me in Yoons' writing was his focus on Coprec's lasting impact, its legacy. Even though the program itself is over, its influence continues, and the mediators who are out there practicing these principles of dialogue and empathy.
Right, and all those people whose lives were changed by Coprec, their stories are really a testament to how well it worked.
For sure. And Yoons also points out how Coprec helped move the field of conflict management forward, especially when it comes to using technology. Think about how quickly they shifted to virtual mediation when the pandemic hit. That shows they were really adaptable and forward-thinking.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about using the technology. It was about understanding that online mediation had its own challenges and opportunities. That's where what Yoons calls digital empathy comes in.
Absolutely. It's more than just knowing how to use the tech. It's about understanding the subtle ways people communicate online and building rapport through a screen.
So it was like they were pioneers figuring out how to do conflict resolution in the digital age.
Totally. But even with all the technology, Yoons really emphasizes that the human element is still at the heart of mediation, being able to listen, empathize, and turn frustration into a chance for constructive dialogue.
Right. Technology can help, but it's those human skills that are essential for getting real results.
Yoons sees Coprec as this great example of how negotiation can be a powerful tool for empowerment and positive change. He compares it to those long, drawn-out legal battles, highlighting how mediation is more humane and accessible.
That makes me think, how can we take what we learned from Coprec and use it in our own lives, even if there isn't a formal mediation program?
That's a great question, and I think it's all about bringing those principles of dialogue, empathy, and creative problem-solving into our daily interactions.
It's like changing how we see conflict. Instead of thinking of it as a battle to win, we need to see it as a chance to grow and understand each other.
So true. Yoons talks about his time with Coprec with so much gratitude. He's really thankful for his colleagues and for having had the opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. He even mentions his book called Conflicto Resuelto, which means resolved conflict. It was published back in 2017. It's probably full of insights from his experiences.
It seems like Coprec was more than just a job for him. It was like a mission to empower people and build a more harmonious society.
Yeah, and even though Coprec is closed now, Yoons believes this is just the beginning of a new chapter 1 that's built on all the stories and lessons they learned.
That's a nice way to think about it. The spirit of Coprec lives on, and hopefully it'll inspire others to keep doing this work of turning conflict into connection.
I think one of the key takeaways here is the power of those personal stories, like those real-life examples of how dialogue and empathy can resolve conflict. It's not just about abstract ideas, it's about seeing those ideas in action and realizing that positive change is possible.
Speaking of those stories, I remember that one Yoons told about a really tense Zoom mediation he was doing with two lawyers. Things were getting pretty heated and his heart rate started going up.
Oh yeah, that one was intense. So what did he do to get things back on track?
Well, first he tried some deep breathing to calm down, But then he did something really interesting.
He told the lawyers what was happening, right? He was really open with them.
Exactly. He talked about his heart rate and how he was trying to manage his stress.
That's so real and authentic. I bet it really changed the mood.
It did. The lawyers were totally surprised by his honesty, and they kind of forgot about their argument. For a minute, their own anxieties came out, and they connected over that shared feeling.
That's amazing how being vulnerable can de-escalate conflict like that.
It reminds us that we're all human, even when we disagree,
Hmm.
and sometimes just admitting that can help us connect and build empathy.
Such an important point. It really goes back to what Coprec was all about. Conflict resolution isn't about ignoring emotions or making people agree. It's about creating a space where emotions can be acknowledged, different perspectives can be heard, and where people can come up with creative solutions together. It's kind of sad to think that something like Coprec is gone now, after hearing about all the good it did.
Yeah, it is, especially when you see the impact it had on so many people and the whole field of conflict resolution.
But as we've been talking about, it's clear that Coprec's legacy goes way beyond the program itself. It's alive in the mediators who are still out there using those principles of dialogue and empathy, and in the people whose lives were changed by it, and in the idea that even conflict can lead to positive change.
That's where I find hope.
Mm.
Just knowing that something like Coprec existed and thrived for a whole decade and that it's still inspiring people, that tells me there's this deep desire in us for connection, for fairness, for peaceful solutions.
I love that it's not just about being sad that it's over, but seeing the potential that Coprec created and helping it grow.
Right. If we each take those seeds, those principles of dialogue and empathy and creative problem solving and use them in our own lives and our communities at work,
Yeah.
just imagine the effect that could have.
That's a powerful thought. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Coprec, what do you think were the most important things about this program and its approach to conflict resolution?
I think it's that focus on human connection. The idea that real conflict resolution isn't about being right, but about understanding different points of view and creating a safe space for honest conversation.
Totally. It's about moving away from that us versus them mentality and realizing that even when we disagree, we can often find common ground.
And what's amazing is that Coprec made this work in so many different settings, from in-person meetings to online mediation.
Hmm.
It shows that these core principles are really adaptable.
And that leads to a really important question for our listeners. How can we use these principles in our own lives? How can we become better communicators, better listeners, and more skilled at handling conflict in our everyday interactions?
That's a question we should all be thinking about, because those small moments, those daily conversations and disagreements, that's where we can really make a difference.
So as we finish up our look at Coprec, we want to leave you with a sense of possibility and a challenge to take action. Remember that every interaction, every conversation is a chance to practice empathy, to really listen and to look for solutions that work for everyone.
Let Coprec's story remind us that we can all be peacemakers, that we can bridge divides and create a world where conflict becomes a path to understanding and positive change.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into conflict resolution. If you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to explore this topic further and think about how you can use these ideas in your own life. Until next time, happy deep diving.